Earlier this week, Iraqi radio singled out someone for a vicious attack. It was not George Bush. It was not the King of Saudi Arabia. The object of all that vitriol was Hosni Mubarak, the president of Egypt. Saddam Hussein had counted on the poor people of Egypt to rise up with him and split the Allied coalition right down the seams. But so far, it hasn't happened. The U.S. believes that it is certainly in part because of this man Mubarak, who took such a strong and early stand, sending 47,000 Egyptian soldiers in to fight alongside his ally and benefactor, the United States. Tonight, we're going to take you to Egypt, a country close enough to feel the pounding pulse of war, to the presidential palace in Cairo to meet the man who is gambling that the future belongs to moderates who stand up to Saddam Hussein.
You are not only looking at the president of Egypt, you are looking at one of Washington's big new heroes, Hosni Mubarak, a man who helped turn the old order upside down. Within hours of Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, it was Mubarak who was out soldering together that U.S. Arab coalition. Mubarak who instantly sent in thousands of Egyptian troops ready to fight.
Fighting offensively?
Of course, to go to inside Kuwait, you'll be fighting. They are not going for a show or a parade.
It's hard to imagine what that decision meant in this part of the world unless you know an ancient Arab proverb. It goes like this: my brother and I against my cousin and I against any strangers. In other words, Mubarak violated a rule perhaps as old as the pyramids themselves when he decided to join the strangers from the West against his Arab cousin, Saddam Hussein. How long do you think it's going to go on?
I think this way it may take 3-4 weeks, something like this.
3 or 4 weeks?
Maximum.
Maximum?
Yeah, using the Air Force to destroy most of the war gear. Unless there's something new which we don't know, it may take longer time. But I don't think in this way it could take more than 1 month.
All of the planes, dozens of planes that now show up in Iran.
I'm not worrying about that. He may just saving them, putting them there.
So you think the planes are being kept in Iran for safety after the ceasefire?
This is my conviction.
And you see this as a sign he's beginning to fold?
Maybe a sign for his... he's a desperate man now.
Tough talk, and a sign Mubarak has come into his own. 10 years ago, he was just the rough-hewn sidekick of a glamorous visionary, Anwar Sadat. Then Sadat was murdered. The bit player had to try to dance the lead. At his inauguration, he nearly wept too.
For Americans who first saw you 10 years ago at the inauguration, obviously in such pain, a lot of them might wonder, what have you learned about yourself in 10 years?
I'm a very patient man and persistent.
A man who says his only remaining worry about this war is that Saddam will use chemical weapons, and then other nations like Israel will escalate it too. The Iraqi civilians will pay the price.
You think Israel would use tactical nuclear weapons?
I can't tell you exactly what may happen. Maybe another chemical weapons, another kind of chemical weapons.
And I asked him, what if Israel retaliates now?
Of course, what I'm going to do, I can't do anything.
Your troops stay? Your troops still fight?
Of course, my troops stay. I can't withdraw my troops.
6 months ago, Mubarak was desperately trying to avoid all this, making 27 separate personal appeals to Saddam Hussein.
For me, he stabbed me in the back.
He says Saddam harbors wild dreams of becoming another Nasser, Gamal Abdel Nasser, the hero of Arab defiance, proving the danger of dreams detached from a knowledge of history or political reality.
I can't believe him. I can't underestimate him or overestimate him.
Is he smart?
Very smart.
Did you like him?
I used to visit him, to see him several times, but I was very cautious. because I had a feeling that something is abnormal in him.
Sounds like a definition of crazy, no?
I told you my description, and you could come out on your own what name you could give it to him.
But you're being careful.
Saddam Hussein has not been returning the favor.
He went pretty far. Iraqi radio yesterday, what are the things he said about you here? He said, deplorably stupid. He attempted to put on a false face of courage that people who do not have manliness do not have.
I'm used to this. Something very normal. It will be abnormal if the radio of Baghdad didn't insult me or insult some other leaders.
But it's going beyond insults. It said he will soon be assassinated by his own people.
Oh, I'm very sorry telling that. You never know what's going to happen to me or to him. I'm one from 55 millions in Egypt. If you want to assassinate one, he will not be able to assassinate 55 millions. Secondly, the assassination of Sadat was not from outside.
And suddenly, just for a moment, he's Sadat's vice president again. The steady but not very flashy son of a middle-class government official. He worked his way up in the military as a fighter pilot, then Air Force Chief of Staff. But as vice president, he always seemed to sit in the shadow of the riveting Sadat, as he did that warm Tuesday in October 1981, when the two of them arrived at the reviewing stand for a military parade. For 2 hours, they watched the artillery go by, the tanks, the camel corps. And then, as Mubarack tells it, at one point, while sitting right here, Sadat decided to stand up and salute the troops. Almost as if by reflex, Mubarack started to stand too. But he was met by a hail of grenades and bullets. Terror, screams, and blood. Mubarack was wounded in the arm, but you could still see him there in the reviewing stand, moving by with a kind of grim determination. When people hear you talk so bravely about Saddam warning of assassinations, they assume automatically your mind goes back.
Not at all. Nobody is going to live forever.
But what will happen here if the war goes on and on? Underneath the wide support Mubarack enjoys now, when you walk on the streets or stop in the cafes of Cairo, you can start to hear a distant drum of real dissent.
No, Americani, no.
Anyway, you are also living in another world.
What do you mean?
Far away. You don't know the psychology of the people.
But maybe it's enough to know the economics of the people. Even those who hate Saddam the messenger are drawn to the message that poor Arab countries should rebel against the rich.
And why wouldn't the message appeal to you if you're one of 55 million Egyptians struggling to get by on a 30th what the per capita income is in Kuwait? If you're trying to make your living on beets and onions and limes when they're driving Mercedes and awash in a sea of oil. And now you're being asked to go off and fight for people who have always been arrogant, selfish, and soft.
For instance, one afternoon we wandered into a place called the Kuwaiti Education Center. We were told that young Kuwaitis were coming here to arm themselves for the tough reality ahead. How tough? Well, it turns out they have to face the awful specter of life without so many servants. Fewer foreigners to do everything for them. So a group of young women were bravely setting out to learn a little sewing. Don't tell a Kuwaiti, war isn't hell.
We are taking this class because if we go back to Kuwait, we cannot find someone who fix our things.
Nor is Egyptian contempt for Kuwaitis helped by what they see at night. There are 7,000 Kuwaiti soldiers fighting with courage at the front. But hundreds of other young Kuwaiti men are battling nothing more than a tricky disco beat. Every night they show up in nightclubs around Cairo, still with their millions, and apparently without much conscience. We decided to try to ask some questions.
I want peace, you don't want war.
Yeah, but it's his country.
At this point, the man's friend intervened, saying he mustn't talk. The Kuwaiti embassy had told everyone to shut up. We even saw an embassy newsletter warning everybody to keep a low profile. So we moved back out to the dance floor, where a cluster of Kuwaiti men was sitting in the corner. "Are you going to fight for Kuwait?" we asked. He smiled and said he only wanted to talk disco.
There are Egyptians who say the Kuwaitis are fat and rich, dancing in our discos at night, while we're fighting for them.
We are fighting for the cause, not for the people, more for one person or two persons or 10 persons.
He's also fighting for Egypt's position after the war. Mubarak may be one of the last real idealists. He said he is certain everything will change, that the oil-rich Gulf states will start helping their poor neighbors, and that George Bush agrees with him that the Israelis must be pushed into a Palestinian solution.
I believe them. Whenever George Bush or Baker tells me something, I'm sure with my experience with them, they go through it.
But 700 miles away from Cairo, a desperate cynic is plotting his next move. He'll probably just gamble a while longer. Gamble that the coalition will collapse under the weight of dying soldiers and eventually destroy the Egyptian president, who is holding it together.
We are not cowards. In the ground war, we'll go through it. We are not that country which could withdraw.
وذلك هو الفوز العظيم.
This doesn't sound like a man who expects it to be over in a few more weeks. He's talking defiantly about going on to the end. He's saying that Iraq is going to win.
Let him say what he wants to say. The man is in a difficult position. You want him just raise his hands? That means that he's committing another suicide.
What will happen?
You could ask the Iraqi people themselves. Are you going to stay under this pressure of bombing every day?
Would you grieve if you heard he were dead?
I have no feeling towards him at all. He's an aggressor.